Clark Kent.
Family in Brisbane.
Hmm?
I go
Yeah.
Griswold.
That's right.
You're right. Okay, you're good to go.
Try that again.
Yeah.
Good evening, President Patrov, Board of Directors, Dr. Macklin. I'm Kevin Annard, Executive Director of Career and Technical Education in College and Career Readiness. I'm giving a quick update or refresher on policy JEC and regulation JECR, school admissions. Yep. Do we have slides?
So close.
So we have slides.
All right, well, while we're waiting that to come up on the screen, we'll go ahead and walk through the handouts that you have in front of you. So there's two pieces to this. We have the policy and the regulation for JEC school admissions. First is the policy. So the policy JEC outlines the overall criteria for admitting students into the district. Our policy mirrors that of the Missouri School Board Association MSBA policy. Some key pieces that are in there, you have them on the list: student admission, entrance ages, requests for student records. Down there at the bottom, we also have admissions restrictions, and that's the statute tied directly to safe schools. So that is a part of our admissions criteria. In the regulation, this clarifies and defines some of the key terms that you see in the policy, as well as the procedures to implement policy JEC. So how do we actually admit students into our district as outlined in the regulation? Some big provisions within there. We have some definitions, clarifying what is a guardian, clarifying the status of a homeless child. Those are some big pieces that are clarified. Also talks about admissions requirements. So it gets into the residency piece, how we handle early childhood special education, ages for eligibility, immunizations, homeless student status, transfer students, and then again, requests for records are a piece of the regulation as well. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the age of eligibility component, because this is a piece that comes up frequently over the course of the year. And so the way the regulation reads currently is the district provides services to resident students qualifying for special education services between the ages of 3 and 21. Any senior qualifying for graduation at the end of the school semester and attaining age 21 during the course of the semester can complete that particular semester tuition free. If a student's 21st birthday is on or before July 31st, then they will transition via the exiting process. And then students whose 21st birthday is on or between August 1st and the end of the first semester will be eligible for enrollment in the first semester only. That August date was a piece that we clarified a few years ago in the board policy committee because it was confusing, because if you tie it to the first day of school, that's somewhat of a moving target. And so we wanted to give families, especially for the transition planning process, a clear date that they could know whether or not their student will be returning for the next school year. Instead of if they have an August birthday and they're waiting to find out what the calendar is their child going to be able to return, that August 1st gives us a cleaner date. So some key considerations with the age of eligibility piece. So policy JEC and regulation JECR specifically cover admission and enrollment at special school district schools and buildings and programs. The policy and regulation does not govern what our partner districts do. We can only govern the policies and processes for our schools and programs. So this does not apply to partner districts like Parkway or Hazelwood. They make their own determinations as far as the admission of students. Second is our ability to enroll and collect average daily attendance on a student. So that age of 21 is an important piece, because the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, after a student is 21 years of age, we are no longer able to claim them on our ADA. So that's why that part where we talked about tuition free, it means after the age of 21, we're no longer receiving state aid for that student's enrollment. They essentially on our records exist as a zero. They're no longer a student with us. What's the impact of that? There was actually a piece of legislation that passed 2 cycles ago that changed Missouri Revised Statute 171.097, which actually requires a background check for students who are not being claimed on your ADA. That provision was put in there specifically for adult students who are taking usually adult education classes housed in a comprehensive high school setting is what that was put there for. But in the same case, if we have someone beyond the age of 21 that we're no longer taking ADA on, they would fall under that provision as an adult learner. The second piece is it exposes the district to some potential liability if we enroll students after that age of 21, because if they're not tuition paying and they're not collecting ADA, there really isn't a reason for them to be in the class from a liability standpoint. If something happens to that individual or something happens to another student as a result of that individual's actions, the district could potentially be on the hook for that, because we're allowing essentially a visitor to be in our classes alongside our rostered students. Questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Just to clarify, an implication of the wording, this would be slide number 4.
Mhm.
It says, that a student may complete that particular tuition free, that is the semester where they turn 21. Could they pay tuition for the second semester?
So currently, we do not have a board policy that's allowing tuition paying students to enroll. That would be something that would have to be approved by the board if you would choose to do that. But currently, we don't have a provision for tuition paying students.
Does that mean that the answer is no, or simply that there's no policy governing that?
The answer is currently, we do not have a policy that allows tuition paying students with the exception of our adult learners and our adult ed program.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, 2.02, 5-year curriculum and instruction plan update with Dr. Bolton.
He always worries. All right. Good evening, President Potroff, Board of Directors, Dr. Macklin. My name is Molly Bolton, and I am the Executive Director of Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. And my first agenda item this evening is the 5-year plan for curriculum and instruction. So while we're waiting for the slides, the purpose of this presentation is really to update the board on that 5-year plan. And we'll start with a few definitions. And so these hopefully do look familiar to you. Every time I do the 5-year plan, I do, distinguish the difference between curriculum and instruction. So curriculum being the what, or the how, not the what, not the how, sorry. And really what the curriculum does is give us that continuity across all of our schools. It's what we want our students to know and be able to do. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. And it helps guide our students for success. And it also is the place where we ensure all of our state standards are addressed in compliance with DESE. When we think about instruction, this is how we teach the curriculum, and this changes depending on the needs of the student. So we use different materials. We might use different strategies to meet the student's need. And we have to have both really when we're looking at student learning. Next slide talks about how we have that curriculum, we have that instruction, and we have that assessment, and all of those pieces are what ties into guiding students' learning. Next. Sorry, I do have a clicker. Real quickly, we're going to, if I can back it up. There we go. Review our existing goals. When you look at the first goal, that is around updating and reviewing our curriculum for both the special education schools as well as the career and technical schools. And right now, all of our scheduled curriculums to be reviewed or written are on target for this year. And you guys will have the chance to peruse those and approve those at the June board meeting. Our second goal is around materials and textbooks, and all of our scheduled material reviews are on target for completion this year, as well as our centralized purchasing process. Our third goal is around instruction and really looking at those integrated tiered models. Many of our directors just finished updating those integrated tiered models, and we're in the process of reviewing those for publishing on our website. And then our fourth goal is around supporting our teachers and our staff with those high leverage practices and high yield strategies. And one thing I'll have for you this evening is we did complete our every other year instructional audit this year. And so I'll have those results to share with you according to that goal. So as we look at our first goal, which is that curriculum review process, I have listed the courses that have been reviewed or written this year. And again, those will come to you at the June board meeting for approval. The next goal is around textbooks and materials. So you can see the adoptions or renewals that we've had for both the special education schools as well as the career and technical schools this year. And then we did implement centralized purchasing this past year. We're getting ready to implement that for this coming spring as well in order to be prepared to bring those purchasing items to the board for approval in the spring. The third goal is that integrated models. And so as I said, those were due February 1st, and we have most of them in. We have a few that are delayed just because of snow days and the days we were off school, impacting when they could meet with partner districts for planning. And then we also have our multi-tiered systems of support in place, and I have listed the districts that we are currently supporting through that process right now.
Why those districts? I'm just curious.
So with that, we look at a criteria, and I can share that criteria with you if you'd like, on which districts are that have significant needs, such as looking at our student achievement, looking at DISPRO, looking at a high needs factors.
So it's data-based.
It is data
Okay.
based. It's very data based. And then also with the data, I would also add, it's also the districts who are willing to partner with us and work.
Molly, I don't want
Sure.
to bug you right now, but when you have time, could you shoot maybe in a Friday packet?
Yeah.
Just the criteria that you use?
Absolutely.
And I'd love to see that later on when we talk about staffing in these particular schools, how that's correlated, if it is correlated. But I don't want to, don't worry about doing it right now.
Yeah,
But
I'll have it in the Friday packet this week.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Should be correlated.
The last goal is really looking at those high leverage practices and high yield strategies. So a couple of things that we're doing around that. We do have our universal walkthroughs, which occur within the first 30 days of school. We then provide the observational data to our administrators so that they can see, and our instructional coaches, so they can see those areas that we might need to improve upon by district. We are continuing our tier 2, tier 3 supports in the area of our literacy coaches, our math coaches, and our social emotional learning effective practice specialists. We have continued with our para induction program. And again, this year that included our 3 para coaches, which I've talked to you about previously, doing some follow-up with that. And then our professional learning for our administrators this year has focused around special education process that Susan Henry and Wendy have championed, as well as leadership trainings. And then we do have a foundational professional learning in both literacy and numeracy. And we have on track for next year to have a foundational training for our social emotional learning too. And these are ones that we encourage our new third year teachers to pick a track that they would like to go deeper in. But our veteran teachers also have the opportunity to access those trainings as well. And then the last is the instructional audits, which were completed in November and December. And I'll be going into those
Interesting.
pieces next. Did you have a question?
No, I
Okay.
said, I'm really interested in
Okay,
this part.
perfect. So just a quick reminder, because we haven't done this for a couple years. The intent of this instructional audit is really to gather information about how those best practices are being utilized across the district. And we do not conduct those every year. We do every other year. So that way we can really identify need areas and work on a plan to improve those. So the process we use is there is an observation tool, and our instructional coaches do walkthroughs and 5 to 8 minute observations in which they're looking for very targeted high leverage practices and instructional characteristics. And these are ones that do have a high research base behind them. And typically when these are in place, we know other high leverage practices are in place as well. So we do a training to make sure everyone's calibrated. So we're getting good data from these. And then, as I said previously, it's a 7 to 10 minute observation. And then we do a short interview with teachers as well at the end. All 23 school districts are included, and our target number is 200 teachers. We do a random sample, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So, hold on, I'm not going the right way. Our auditing, our sampling procedure, we do look at teachers that are assigned to partner districts, SSD schools and programs, and our career and technical schools. We exclude teachers from early childhood and transition services. often because they're maybe not as traditional classrooms as we would see a lot of these high leverage practices in place. And they would have other high leverage practices that we would be looking at in those particular settings. We do a stratified sampling to ensure that districts are represented based on the number of teachers they have in that district. And so that way, larger districts, few more teachers, but it's still stratified. So we can compare results across. That sampling method does also provide us with the opportunity to look at all three levels within a district. So elementary, middle school, and high school. And we do sample for every partner district and every SSD school. And then we also try to do a diversity of schools in the partner districts to ensure we have that as well. So some of the key high leverage practice drivers that we're looking for are rules being reinforced, our student goals are posted, the class mission is posted, our learning targets for the lessons are posted, that they're utilizing explicit instruction, and that they are practicing the rules. We know if these are in place, then many of our other high leverage practices will be in place as well. So for the look fors, some other information that we gather is the type of classroom, the grade level, the number of students in the classroom at the time of the observation, as well as the location of that classroom. So for example, the main thing we look for is it in approximate, proximity of where their grade level peers are being instructed, not in the basement.
Not in the basement
And
or in
then,
their special wing.
yes. And then we also look at some environmental factors. So ensuring adequate space, ensuring adequate lighting, those sorts of things. We are also looking for data being visible. So our student data where students can access it, staff can access it. And then those universal supports, as well as the high leverage practices. And then what kind of instructional materials might they be using? When we do our interviews with the teachers, it's a very short interview. It does ask what kind of formatives that the teachers use, as well as how they're using that data to inform their instruction. We do want to make sure that they are aware of their tier 1, which would be their partner district core materials, as well as their tier 2 and tier 3 interventions that they may be receiving. And then how do they get their materials? Are they only getting their materials through SSD, or is the partner district providing especially some of those core materials? And then are the materials appropriate for the students? And then we also ask them if they've had training in those materials to ensure. So we were able to get 194 observations completed, as well as the interviews, a little 6 less than our 200 goal. But we did have, this was November, December. So you do have illnesses and things impacting some of that. You can see here the percent of the observations, as well as the number of staff in each district from that sampling. When we look at the settings, what you can see here is the types of settings. So you can see predominantly the observations occurred in a resource setting with a single focus, meaning that the students that were in there at that time were all focused on the same type of goal. So for example, it might have been a writing group or a reading group, as opposed to a resource setting with multiple focuses where you might have some students working on math, some students working on reading at the same time. So you can kind of see the breakdown of those there. When we look at our key findings, some of the pluses that we saw is a portion of the staff were implementing high quality instructional practices, and it was very similar to our last. So we're still keeping pretty high rates there. Universal supports were also at a pretty high rate, 89% overall. And then 77%, I'll go a little deeper in just a few minutes. 77% of the high leverage practice indicators were also observed. When we look at our opportunities, there were somewhat different trends across the SSD schools and the 3 county zones. Because the numbers are small, we do not report out by individual district. We report out by zones. And I'll show you those zones in just a few moments. And we noticed that our zone 3 ratings were a little bit lower relative to our 21-22 data. And also, when we look at the indicators under instructional materials, especially our classroom learning systems, we have seen a decrease in the implementation of our classroom learning systems. So that's definitely an opportunity. So this next slide really goes into comparing our 3 years that we've, 3 separate times that we've done this instructional audit. The first was in 2019. The second was in 21, and then the third just being completed in 23. So you can see we made gains from 1920 to 21-22, but we look pretty consistent with 21-22 and 23-24. We also have broken those down by zones. We do have the districts listed in each zone over to the side. So you can kind of see overall the average proportion of those indicators that are present. And you'll see the areas down at the bottom. So then as we go into each of those areas, for example, the next slide on slide 20 shows the universal supports. And this is overall. I did have a request from Director Mulder to break that down by zones. And so you do have a supplemental copy that has broken it down by SSD schools as well as zones for each of those areas. So you can see that as well. So that's that supplemental packet that's been provided there. We look at the next slide, we are looking at those high leverage practices. Again, this slide here shows you overall, but in your additional packet, we do have those broken down by zones. And then the last part of our results show those instructional materials, and that's where you'll see a little bit lower scores than what we have seen in the past. All right, some additional findings. So as far as the locations and the observations of where those locations were located, 95% of the classrooms were located in what we would consider context appropriate places. So situated near where their general education peers are being educated. That is an improvement over the prior audit. Our environmental factors were also very conducive to learning, 97% plus. Student data was more often visible in a classroom than we saw in 21-22, although that percent is still lower than what we would like to see. And then as we look at assessment, the most commonly reported frequency of assessments is weekly and biweekly, which would be what we would expect. Appropriateness of instructional materials. There were a high percentage of teachers who described the materials as appropriate across all 3 areas, which is an improvement over what we've seen in the past as well.
What is?
I'm sorry?
I said, what is that number?
I would have to, we did the kind of the average with the different context in
Okay.
here.
Yeah, look, thank you.
And then training for instructional materials, we did have a higher percent of teachers reported being trained in those instructional materials. And the nice thing was math has been a big area of focus for us. And you'll see that we had 16% higher in math. The use of interventions and training, a high percentage of our teachers also reported being trained in the materials that they were using, which has also been a bigger focus for us.
On our data, since I'm guessing we're keeping this data and then just going to build on it, would it be worthwhile to put an asterisk on 2019, 2020 data and state that while that may be the first time we're keeping it, that was also a time when COVID hit that may have caused an anomaly?
So
like
it
that
happened in the
once?
fall before COVID hit.
Okay, it happened in the fall.
Yeah, it happened. We do this in November and December, so that was prior to COVID hitting. Yes. Can you give me next slide, please? So kind of our next steps for this audit data is we are engaging with our stakeholders. All of our directors, coordinators, and coaches, this data has been shared with. And we have recommended that at their district level meeting, that they discuss the findings and create action plans for those areas that were opportunities. We also will be going a little bit deeper with the data to really look at those trends that we're seeing and then identifying those priority areas. There will be a plan then for an additional audit in the 25-26 school year to stay on that cycle. Just to, we know things that are monitored are done,
Good change,
right?
Yeah.
And so we want to ensure that these things are continued to be monitored and then our focus areas will fall around those areas, those opportunity areas to increase. Next slide, please. Future plans just for the 5-year plan, kind of coming back to that is we are continuing this year our summer academy for our partner district principals around supporting special education and processes. We've received really good feedback from that. Last year we had more attend than the first year. So we're excited about that. And we have shared that with superintendents as well. We're going to, in our SSD schools, we are working on proficiency scales and competency-based learning. That is a big push by DESE right now. And so we will be continuing our work around those. And then also, you know, supporting our administrators in our instructional audit data, as well as our universal data, so that they are continuing to plan professional learning and additional supports in the areas that we identified for opportunities. Next slide. And I'll open it up for questions.
I have a question and a comment.
Absolutely.
One, super excited about the Principal Academy. I actually had a principal ask me about their process today.
Nice.
So,
Well,
would've
tell
been
them
a
to come to the academy.
good opportunity to plug the academy. I will see
Yes.
that principal tomorrow and we'll say that. Also, I want to reference slide 19.
Okay.
Just because we were talking about the MTSSs in zone 3, and we know they're like that, I don't know, but MTSSs support classrooms and like putting things like universals in place. And so I'm wondering, like, what are your predictions as to what's the gap between zone 3 having MTSS support, but zone 3 being the zone that's struggling with universals?
So some of the school districts in zone 3, not all of them,
Not all,
do
yeah.
have the MTSS support. And I would say some of our challenges, teacher vacancies is a big one.
Okay.
We have a lot of paras and doing
subs.
long-term subs and substitutes in those areas, and that is impacting our data. And then with that, you also have the teachers that are there covering their IEPs for the substitutes. And so that has an impact on, you know, how those teachers are running those classrooms and what are those things you see. So I do think that does contribute to that a little bit. Also, we have a much higher percentage of our new teachers there. And so part of the training that they would go through typically happens their first or second year. So we may have had some first year teachers in this sample that maybe haven't gone through our CCI and TSP trainings. So that could be another factor.
I think that's helpful. And I think as directors look through this data, and
Yes.
it's like, how can we know vacancies are real? We know that subs are going to be in place. Like, how are we using instructional coaches and MTSS folks to get into classrooms early to help literally just set systems up?
Exactly.
Because we know without universal, students are going to struggle. If I don't know the rules, I'll make them up.
Yep. And I'll push the line because you haven't told me, you haven't taught me what the rules are, so I can push the limits. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Other questions?
I got a couple questions. I appreciate all the information and the breakdown by zone. I appreciate that very much. I'm curious about the sampling. Are the teachers who are selected for this, is it randomized?
It is.
It is? Okay.
Yes, we use Matt Charber does it for me, and he uses a formula where we pull a list of all the teachers, and it's a randomizing
Gotcha.
formula that he has, and that's how the teachers are chosen.
It's good to know. The other thing, I'm curious, I'm trying to figure out which page it is again, but in regards to, the types of classrooms. You've got 17, slide 17. You've got we're heavily weighted on resource, single focus classrooms.
Mhm.
Just knowing that we've got most of our kids in gen ed classroom settings, I'm curious about the proportions there and the decision, the choice made to survey that way.
So the way we just identify what they're doing, I would say a lot of these would be, the resource setting would be in the general education school. But they would be pulled into a resource setting for a set amount of time during the day is typically how that goes.
Good.
So they would be pulled in for an additional math group or an additional reading group, for intervention.
Oh, I see. Okay,
Does that make sense?
it does.
Okay.
Yep.
And I would say that, we do have, I don't know the exact percentage, but I would say a large percentage of our services are delivered in that way,
Okay.
especially at the elementary level.
Mhm.
Middle and high school, we might do some more co-teaching, but oftentimes they will have a study skills class or something like that in their schedules where that would be considered a resource setting.
I guess my curiosity was the co-taught classroom settings and wondering if it would be beneficial to look at those and increase the number of.
We do have a high percentage of, especially secondary, doing co-teaching type models. And we could probably look at, I could probably try to pull some data around, the percentage of students that are in primarily that co-teaching versus resource, if you'd like to see that.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
It's harder to measure these things in a co-taught classroom just because
Yeah, it's not
the
their
co-taught
classroom.
model.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
just like,
Right,
there are
right.
like 8 co-teaching models. And so, yeah, that'd be hard.
I don't know that I can have that to you by Friday, but
No, it's
by the
okay.
next week I could.
Yeah. When it's available.
Other questions?
I've got a few,
Yep.
that aren't connected, but we'll just go through it. So, in the days, now that everything's on a laptop for the kids, how often do they actually get, this is almost a question for you guys too, actual textbooks? Or by
Mhm.
textbooks, do you include, even though it's on the computer?
So when
And
we look at instructional materials, we're not just looking at textbooks. We would be looking at, what it could be an online resource that they're projecting on the Promethean board or the smart board. So when we're looking at instructional materials, it could be digital as well as physical materials.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering how much physical, I know for the littles, they
Mhm.
definitely, yeah. But as they get older and more proficient at the computer and at post-COVID, where if you gotta take something home, you're taking home this, how much is still
I think it
tactile?
depends on the needs of the
Tactile.
student,
Uh-huh.
especially in special education. Some of our students still need that concrete
Right,
material. And so I think, it would depend on the needs of the students. We do have a lot of digital resources now as well as print resources.
my next question was, this just caught my eye, because I saw on page 7, updated edition of street law for high school.
Yes,
And I thought, oh, that has to be a CTE class. And then I was like, no,
Nope.
that's a sped school class.
it is.
What is street law for high school?
It is a social studies elective, and it goes through just general laws
Okay.
for students. And they call it street law. That's the name of the textbook, and that's what we called the course. But it's just like, so you get a traffic ticket and you have to go to court. What is that like? Or
Oh.
so, you get hurt at a store. What are your rights? So it's the basic,
It's not bad
you know,
course.
I know.
Mr. Parkin teaches it across the street here. And he actually came to me with the idea of this course. Many of our students are unfortunately sometimes involved with the law. And so we really want them to know their rights and understand the procedures. And sometimes, we do teach government and they are required to take government,
Right.
but there's a lot of things around government. So we were able to create this course as an elective, a social studies elective, because it is aligned to the social studies standards.
That's neat, yeah, because the government course is more about the Constitution and the three.
Yes, where this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
more your practical everyday.
Right,
I learned a
I
lot
like
with this course too.
yeah.
Thank you.
So-
Right, I want to take it too.
My last question is for the, who is doing the observations? Who goes into the classroom?
It is our instructional coaches for the instructional audit observations. Now, we also have the universal observations that are done, and those are done by the administrators because that is part of the evaluation process.
So administrators mean the principal.
Special
high-
education coordinators or the principals in our SSD schools.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
absolutely.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
All right, next on our agenda is 2.03 second quarter strategic and CSIP plan update. With Dr. Molly Bowles.
Me again.
Welcome back.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna try this clicker again to see if I can get it. Are you doing it or am I? It's me, okay. It's working randomly. All right, so this is our quarterly strategic plan and comprehensive school and plan improvement plan update. So this would be for second quarter, which ran October through the middle of January. So the purpose is just to share with you our second quarter updates. Just a quick reminder, this is our second year of the 5-year plan. So second quarter of the second year of the 5-year plan. This next slide should be very familiar to you guys at this point. So this just goes through the difference between the strategic plan and the CSIP plan. So update you a little bit on the strategic plan process. So 1.1 and 1.2 of our strategic plan, we do have the same team working on that. And that is our database systems. And kind of what's, if you'll remember from our last update, the solution that we do have a grant with MoreNet that we're working with MoreNet on. And the solution that we were using, Evaluate, was discontinued. And so we are still working with MoreNet. The nice thing is MoreNet has really involved us in looking for a new vendor. So we are exploring some of those vendors. And we also had EdFi join us, which they are the ones who originally gave us the grant with MoreNet. And so they are also working with us to find a good solution there. We're continuing our data governance work and looking at some IT architecture updates, as well as starting to map up the processes of our location data. That's where we've decided to target first with our data governance process. And so really looking at kind of mapping out the processes right now around that data to really document them and then provide some support documents in Confluence, which is our support. So they're continuing those conversations to really think about that data warehouse and working through that location data, as well as thinking about administrative professional learning for next school year and what that might look like around data governance. Okay, so goal 2 is around optimizing those resources. You'll remember that 2.1 was already completed, and 2.2 is really working on identifying the factors related to how we distribute our resources. And with that, there are some joint resolution agreements that do impact some of that. And so really digging into some of those. And then really kind of how do we, what their next steps are is really looking at how do we measure equitable distribution and also looking at funding for curriculum resources and how that might impact that distribution. Goal 3 is that communication channel. So the first one being our relationships with businesses. So we have sent a survey. We did that in December, did not get a high return rate. So have resent that in January to the ones who have not filled it out from our partners. And then we'll begin to analyze that data and have a partnership meeting this late spring, and then really looking at supporting transition as well as our CTE programs. And then an onboarding process. They've been working on that for a while, an onboarding process when we do bring a partner, a community partner on to really learn about our district and all the opportunities that we have. Oftentimes we've had partners who said, oh, we didn't know you did that too, or that too, and we could help support in those areas. So really kind of looking at an onboarding to help with that. Our family engagement, we did launch the family engagement survey. It just closed. We just got those preliminary results back. So we're super excited to dig into that and really think about our action planning from those results. 3.3 is communication amongst departments. And so really looking at our branding and our customer service in each of those areas. And then really getting some feedback on the staff newsletter that we have sent out to see if it's meeting our stakeholders' needs. So we'll be working on an FAQ document really focused on central office as well as the Learning Center to answer a lot of those questions that often come up and you have to figure out who to go to find the answers. So we're hoping to centralize that a little bit and evaluating our current communication process. The next part is our CSIP updates. So our first goal really being around our student success. 1.1 is our transition, our post-secondary planning. So some great things happening here. We have taken the self-determination module and worked with our MTSS facilitators and aligning that and being a part of the work that our MTSS facilitators talk with our partnering districts about. And currently Rockwood is gonna take that on and try it out with us and give us feedback on what that self-determination looks like when it's built into an MTSS model. We are also in the process of revising our follow-up survey and really looking to gauge the satisfaction level of our graduates and their families on how are we doing towards preparing our students for that good life. Next steps, looking at some action research around the assessment scores for that tiered supports, as well as then action planning from those follow-up surveys. 1.2 is student data and research. So really looking at some of that proactive planning. So we're looking at a data review from our partner districts to really prioritize some of those risk factors we see for students, and then determine those risk factors and what methods we might have for collecting that data. And then if we don't have a systematic way for getting that data from partner districts, really looking at working with 1.1 to figure out how to have access to that data. The last one for this one is the collaborative planning with partners. So we're working on brainstorming and the prototype for this work. And so then we will be able to make some updates and changes as needed and then expand the team, including partner district liaisons as we go, because we feel like that might be a voice that could bring some pieces to the table. Goal 2 is really looking at the decision-making process. So Dr. Grisby's group has been reviewing programming data district-wide and really identifying the need for more consistent programming across the county. And so they're going to be researching best practices according to disability type for that programming, and then starting to develop that common language for defining those services. 2.2 is evidence-based practices, and we are in the process of working through our evidence-based tools that we have and really streamlining those and making sure they're accessible to all of our staff. And then we will continue working on a core program resource for our partner districts. As they're evaluating core resources, we would be providing them with the research around how those core programs work with students with disabilities. And then our last goal area, too far, is creating those learning environments and systems for those highly mobile students. And Mr. Andert is working on that piece. And with that piece, they are journey mapping selective districts focused on Hazelwood and Riverview right now, and then Rockwood and Kirkwood. And what we're doing there is looking at highly mobile districts and then low mobile districts, if you will, to really kind of look at what journey mapping looks like across those districts. Then they will also be coordinating with 2.1 to make sure, which is our programming CSIP goal. So making sure that the programming, as we're looking at that and defining that better, that we're looking at what programming do highly mobile students need or are best suited for them, so that we're incorporating that in there. They are also going to be working with the IEP writing pilot to really think about what are some of those opportunities we have as students transition between schools and between districts, and then solicit some feedback from that journey mapping. And I'll open it up for any questions that you might have.
What is journey mapping?
So journey mapping is really looking at, so from the time a student is going to leave a school or district, what are the steps it takes then to get them into their new school? What are the processes that they have to go through and everything in order to get into their new school and start services? Mhm.
I have a question, on highly mobile students.
Yes.
On the highly mobile students, is that defined if an individual moves out of the district or if they just move?
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
It
I
could be
mean,
within
you-
the district in a new school.
but it would have to be a new school.
Yes. What are you thinking?
No, I was just thinking of the elements of change in a person's life, even if they move and they may still end up being in the same school.
Mhm.
And I was also remembering the time when we had, I believe you presented, well, I know you presented, Molly, about how we were trying to make sure that an individual had their same had their same teacher as often as possible. In other words, we wanted stability of teachers. And then we're trying to deal with that when we had students that were being that mobile, and how that caused some problems.
I do remember that. That was a conversation around the equity
Yeah.
framework when we were talking about the equity.
So go back to the high mobility.
Mhm.
Is there anything? I could see where that could cause all kinds of difficulties. Is
Right.
there any way to deal with that now?
What we're looking at is really looking at what can we do to support those students when they're moving into that new school, because we are the common factor, right? We service all St. Louis County schools. So if they're moving into another St. Louis County school, be it within their district or across the county into another district, we should be able to, keep that continuum pretty easily for them. And that's our goal with this team, is to really look at it from that aspect, so they have the least amount of loss of learning time, because sometimes when a student moves, especially if they're a student in transitional, there are a lot of challenges because many districts require they have an occupancy permit and those sorts of things, or documentations. And so really trying to think through what can we do as a district to help support that and make it move a little bit quicker.
And possibly helping to register the child in the new school. I mean,
Yes.
because
Yes.
these are things
Yes.
that I'm thinking is just not common knowledge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all the things they have to go through and it's different districts, and maybe sometimes even within the same district in a different school.
Yeah, that's,
They may require different documentation. So we're in the process of trying to gather that information and see what we can do to make that transition easier for families.
Especially when they transition in the middle of the IEP process.
Yes, yes.
what
absolutely.
happens when that's exactly what I was saying. What happens when an individual goes, even if it's in the same district? Outside it just makes it even more difficult.
Absolutely does.
But even if it's in this, from one school to another school in the district.
It should be pretty smooth in most cases, I would think, from one school to another. It would just be that school would then transfer their records over, and with our teachers, a lot of times then they will contact the receiving
Okay.
teacher and they will have conversations. But we'd still like to see it more systematic,
Okay.
right? That's best practice. That's what we always hope happens, but we want to ensure that that's really happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yes.
much.
So 2.0 for the MSIP monitoring report presentation is just if we have questions. Does anyone have any questions about this?
Yeah.
I just want to refresh my memory because I looked at this.
Absolutely.
earlier.
Take your time.
Looks like health service provision is challenging with
It is shortage
the
of
staffing and.
shortage. Yeah.
Uh.
The nurse shortage impacts.
I tried to recruit a friend from Chicago to come down, a nurse friend who is, I'm like, hey, his first thought was, well, you don't get many days off. It's like, you get the summer off. It's like, oh, I didn't think of that.
Mhm.
And all the holiday, you get spring break,
Yeah,
you get
winter break,
winter breaks,
snow
yes.
days, come on down.
Federal holidays, pretty much.
So, yeah.
No, no, I'm sorry, no questions. Yeah,
No
I think
questions.
we're just competing against some pretty impressive wage increases with
Yes,
nurses around town,
Mhm.
and we're not keeping it.
absolutely. All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I.
All opposed? Thank you. See you in 2 weeks.